Following on from the protests in Oxford this weekend against 15-minute cities, or as I would call them, climate lockdowns, I wanted to talk about the kind of three big strategic communications strategies that are at play at the moment that you can clearly see if you're looking. And number one, it's the swerve away from these climate lockdowns, as I will continue to call them, having anything to do with climate. So in 2019, Oxford declared a climate emergency, allowing them to bring in and push forwards any number of climate measures. And 15-minute cities are part of that. So closing down for climate effectively. And that's how it was also articulated on the website. It was about climate, but now it's not. The swerve is in, and they don't want to talk anything about climate. They don't want this matter to be related to climate. It's about low traffic neighbourhoods. And they are swerving your attention with their kind of propaganda machine to talk about 15-minute cities and low traffic neighbourhoods. And the great thing about what they're doing here, or the great thing in their eyes, is it's something no one wants to argue with, right? It's the same playbook as Black Lives Matter. So you call it something that no one can disagree with. Black Lives Matter. Well, absolutely, of course they do. In the same way as I would say, well, you can say water is wet. Also true. So then you go on to 15-minute cities. Doesn't that sound fun? Everything within walking distance or easily accessible. You'll have a doctor's surgery, you'll have a dentist, like it doesn't matter if you can't get an appointment. You'll be able to just walk where you want. There'll be little businesses selling bread and fish and meat like the good old days, selling it in with propaganda and trying to swerve away from climate lockdown to low traffic neighbourhoods, so that all you can think is, well, of course you want low traffic. I don't want traffic around my house. Of course. So they make it such that all you can think about is the label, and the badges have been switched out to make it something that sounds very desirable. Whereas, of course, climate lockdowns sound very undesirable indeed. The second thing is a technique that's been used so often now, and I guess I've been part of it for, well, as long as I've been in the public eye to a greater or lesser degree, and that is to discredit. So discredit anybody who says something different. Discredit anybody who says something that's not in line with your thinking. Discredit anybody who's talking about climate lockdowns as if this is a climate lockdown. This is about 15-minute cities, and this is about low traffic neighbourhoods. Look at those lunatics talking about climate lockdown. It's the same idiots that were anti-vaxxers. It's the same people who didn't want people to be forced to have an injectable given to them by the state. Discredit anybody who's speaking out against these kind of climate lockdowns. And that's why my ugly mug appeared on Newsnight recently as one of those people who must be discredited. And you'll notice the fact checkers swarming in as well. I mean, I just wonder who fact checks the fact checkers. And in time, when history shows that many of us were on the side of the right, do fact checkers ever realise that they were wrong, or do they ever apologise? And of course, the answer to that is no. And then the third strategic play, which we've seen 1,000 times before, is detail. So what you do is you focus people in on detail. So now you don't want them to think about climate lockdowns. You don't want them to question what would happen next. You don't want them to be thinking about what that would actually mean if you can only use your car this many times, if you can't actually do the school run and get to work and visit your mum in one day, or if you're a mobile hairdresser and it means your business can no longer function because you won't be able to potter from the home to home to home to home that you need to for your business to work. You want to pull people down into the detail of the thing. So Oxford City Council just released a press release on the day of the protest talking about how in low traffic neighbourhoods the blockades would be made of wood, and what type of wood, and how that wood would be fabricated, and what those boxes would look like, and how they might be able to be used for planters, and how the local people might be able to can plant plants in them, and what sort of plants might be planted in the boxes. Detail, detail, detail. Because what you're trying to do, and what you're hoping to do, and what happens, and it works brilliantly, is you're trying to limit the horizon of people's views. You don't want people looking beyond and saying, well, this is a climate lockdown. That means I'm now not going to be able to use my car when I want. What comes next? And if this was just about Oxford and traffic, why is it happening in this town, in this city, in that place, in that other country? Well, maybe there's a playbook that's being used to control us. And if you're only going to be allowed to drive your car 100 times this year, what will it mean next year? And what will it mean in 5 years? And let me say very clearly, in 5 years, I believe British people will not have the right to own their own vehicle. And we can fact check that to death. But I believe in 5 years from now, British people will not have the right to own their own car. And no one will come back and say, oh, do you know what, Katie, you were right. And that doesn't matter. But just remember, if you will, and even if you disagree with everything I've just said, maybe you'd be kind enough just to look up long enough to have a look for the swerve away from discussions about climate and 15-minute cities being related to climate, and suddenly the talk of LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, and what sort of planters will be used inside those low traffic neighbourhoods. So getting down to the detail to limit people's long-term horizons, and then look at the discrediting of anyone who speaks out against them, and then the use of the press and shock tactics such as there's been death threats to councillors to make those they need to discredit truly look like monsters, in order that they can push forward with this climate-based agenda, which will ultimately lead to a grab for your private vehicles. And then eventually one of us, many of us, will have to be penalised for speaking out in this way in order to teach others not to speak out as I have done or attend protests. And that's why we saw the massive over-policing that I've shown to you at what was a Festival of Freedom this weekend. So just some things to be aware of, as many of you are, or a plea to others who think low traffic neighbourhoods are a great thing, just to observe these 3 or 4 shifts or strategic plays that are so visible if you take a moment to look.